Nintendo Directs were a brilliant, bold new idea when they launched, the brainchild of Nintendo's true blue ocean thinker, Satoru Iwata. They led the way in the industry and brought the company and fans ever closer. But now, everybody from Sony to Sonic the Hedgehog are doing direct-style internet presentations. So Nintendo should just feel smug and keep going, right? No, of course not. This is exactly the time to give the format a massive kick up the backside, to go where the puck's going to be, to put an original twist on things. I was struck by a 2016 investor Q&A response by Shigeru Miyamoto about the Iwata Asks segment, where he said, and I quote, "The former president Mr. Iwata and I had talked about how the Iwata Asks section had fallen into a rut, and we will consider what format will best suit this type of content." Well, Iwata Asks only ran for about 9 years, and Mr. Iwata was already starting to get itchy feet. Imagine how he would feel now if he saw Nintendo still putting out directs 13 years after he first initiated the concept. Yes, I think it's time to evolve Nintendo Directs, and whether or not this global test pay links to that, I think it demonstrates one way that it could happen. But before we get to speculation, we really need to understand what Nintendo have built with the Direct concept so far. What can we tell about how they're put together, and can we consider what Nintendo's attitude towards them is? Why are they valuable? How have they evolved? And what patterns can we see in the way they're put together? So settle in for a Nintendo Forecast deep dive into the Nintendo Direct format and its future. So as we know, the genesis of the Direct format came straight from Satoru Iwata himself, and was at first a slightly kooky idea to stream presentations over the internet. Until that point, Nintendo had mainly showcased its wares via trade shows or press releases, but this has innate problems. For one thing, with trade shows you're beholden then to somebody else's schedule and to journalistic interpretation. You don't have true control over your message except to the small number of people who are physically in the room. Moreover, Nintendo was fresh off one of their most disastrous ever E3 presentations. In 2010, Shigeru Miyamoto stepped up to demonstrate how Zelda Skyward Sword would allow amazing motion controls, and yet connection issues meant that the presentation would go down in infamy as a confirmation of the worst fears of motion control skeptics. In fact, we are fortunate that Satoru Iwata gave a quite detailed accounting of the thought process that prompted this change in an investor Q&A on the 1-year anniversary of the very first Nintendo Direct. Although his comments are quite long, I think they bear careful study. He said, "One important reason why we are launching Nintendo Direct is that we had a very difficult problem where new game information that we announced was quickly distorted and then spread before we could put it up on the internet. Consumers did not receive our messages as they were, and I remember remarking 1 year ago at the financial briefing that perhaps the information wanted by consumers, including game content, should be delivered directly to them. On the other hand, it would be wrong to say that I do not find any value in talking to analysts, as I'm doing now, or talking to the media, as I did at the Osaka Securities Exchange yesterday during our financial announcement press conference. It depends on the content." To elaborate, while details like new game features which are different from its previous iteration are something that consumers find valuable and use to decide whether to buy the game or not, they are not necessarily valuable to reporters who will write about Nintendo or analysts who are thinking of investing in Nintendo. Until recently, we simply had no other choice but to deliver our messages through the media. But today, thanks to the advent of the internet, watching videos online is nothing out of the ordinary, and it has created new ways in which to make announcements. When we launched Nintendo Direct a year ago, we did not know how many people would care to watch it, but it now appears that as many as 600,000 to 1 million people watch our Nintendo Direct videos in a week. Because Nintendo Direct can reach out to such a wide audience, we feel that it is definitely worthwhile to devote our energy to continuing our Nintendo Direct endeavours. In fact, each time we do a Nintendo Direct broadcast, more people visit the Nintendo eShop to download game demos and 3D videos, and it has become clear that it also leads to a higher use rate of the hardware and even higher hardware sales. This convinces us that it is worthwhile to do regular broadcasts. I do not know when people will become bored with an average man in his 50s talking at length about games, but at the moment, it appears that many people are enjoying and paying attention to our Nintendo Direct broadcasts, and while this is the case, we will continue to air them. You mentioned that perhaps Nintendo Direct does not reach our casual audience. It is true that Nintendo fans or game fans are aware of Nintendo Direct, and when they learn that Nintendo is going to broadcast a new installment of Nintendo Direct, they tune in and watch it live. We are very grateful that people gather to watch Nintendo Direct and become very excited about it, but it would be wrong to say that Nintendo Direct has no effect on a more passive audience who do not actively look for game information, and there are numbers to show that. Here in Japan we have what is called the Nintendo Direct channel on YouTube, and after we finish our live broadcasts, we upload the videos themselves onto the channel. Nintendo Direct broadcasts, which excited a number of fans who watched them live, do not necessarily attract a number of others to watch the same videos on YouTube. However, there is an exception to that. The Animal Crossing New Leaf Direct video, Japanese only, that we broadcast in Japan the other day has attracted more than 1.1 million views. It is not exceptional for a 3-minute music video to have 1 million views, but for a 47-minute video, which only explains in detail about a game, this figure is phenomenal, and what's more, 65% of the views came from smart devices. This means our audience goes beyond our fans who watch our broadcasts live for information. We can then, for example, attract those who are very interested in the Animal Crossing series, but perhaps have no interest in Nintendo Direct, or those who know nothing about Nintendo Direct, but heard about the video somewhere else. The Animal Crossing New Leaf Direct video seems to have become quite popular, and it even made its way into the charts on YouTube in Japan. This means that one could simply visit YouTube without any specific purpose and find a video which they think might be interesting to watch. This is what is happening. The idea that Nintendo Direct does not reach out to the casual audience is in fact a stereotypical one, and we are learning that when certain conditions are met, we can reach a wider audience. On the other hand, it does not mean we can now dispense with other means of marketing because of Nintendo Direct. Our answer to your question at the moment is that Nintendo Direct is a new pillar for us, but we will pursue other activities at the same time. However, Nintendo Direct is a marketing channel which we discovered, tried, and have made some progress on from last year through this year, and we do not know whether this endeavour will continue to work in the future. Just as some marketing methods lose their appeal over time, people will become bored if we simply continue to do the same thing, as is the case throughout the entertainment industry. In a sense, I feel that Nintendo Direct has an entertainment aspect too, so I think the challenge is whether we can continue to innovate successfully. Well, I would argue that the challenge that Satoru Iwata set down here is still extant. But how has Nintendo already innovated the Nintendo Direct format over the years? And there certainly have been a number of smaller changes. Sometimes Directs have had a regional focus, with different editions being put out in Japan, North America, Europe, and sometimes other regions such as South Korea or Hong Kong and Taiwan. There are still some logistical reasons to have different concurrent presentations, of course, but generally speaking, we've seen, particularly in the Switch era, a homogenization of the process. Instead of regional heads like Reggie Fils-Aimé or Satoru Shibata in the spotlight, a much narrower group of people now lead these presentations, usually Shinya Takahashi with the odd assist from Yoshiaki Koizumi, and then interviews with specific lead producers such as Eiji Aonuma or Yoshio Sakamoto as necessary. Ex-employees Kit and Krista are informative on this, explaining in a previous podcast that a major consideration needed to be synchronizing the timing of key revelations across all markets to avoid spoilers, even when different regions had different games being released. They didn't want the new Metroid Prime 4 trailer to be launching significantly earlier in one territory than in another. We have seen other evolutions. Pokemon Presents have become regular events, especially around Pokemon Day in recent years, while Indie Worlds, partner presentations, and specialist directs for non-game announcements have become commonplace as well. Recently, there was consternation that Nintendo ducked the month of September entirely for announcements, and small wonder, since September has for a very long time been a prime piece of Nintendo announcement real estate. Even in 2020, when Directs were basically skipped entirely, there was a Super Mario Bros. 35th Anniversary Showcase, as well as a separate announcement about Hyrule Warriors. A September Direct has been a mainstay of the Switch era. Even pre-Switch, 2015 was the last time a September passed Directless. But of course, Nintendo likes to zig where we expect them to zag, and I don't think it's really all that astonishing that they've hit the pause button on Directs after the 1-2 punch of an Indie World and Partner Showcase at the end of August. While August is a little earlier than they usually do these things, it's still within the same window, and potentially the spot was made available to them by the fact that the Pokemon Company ceded the position this year. This was, after all, the first August since 2020 not to feature a Pokemon Presents presentation. Still, I think it's worth considering what Nintendo is looking to achieve with the Direct overall. First of all, consider the alternative method of presenting information, such as making an appearance at an expo or big events like E3 back in the day. You need to hire a venue, gather an audience, transport people and equipment, some of which is subject to stringent security protocols from place to place. And at the end of it, you don't have the control of the message you're putting out. That is not Nintendo's style. Nintendo Directs are quite different. It gives them minimum friction in terms of scheduling and maximum flexibility. Potentially, these Directs can be assembled over many weeks and months piecemeal. However, that's not to say that these announcements are without their complexities. For one thing, the Directs generally include a large number of third-party revelations, and yet the games featured in Directs are a fraction of the games that are ultimately released on Nintendo systems. Whereas back in the days of Wii U, Nintendo might have been very keen to get publishers to use Directs as a platform for their brand. These days, it's likely that the competition for limited Direct space is incredibly tight. In theory, Nintendo could just do Direct after Direct to promote everything that moves on their system, but then they risk viewer fatigue and audiences switching off. It seems certain to be the case that there will be intensive negotiations governing which games are actually shown in which Directs and for how long. Nintendo's most recent General Direct in June 2024 had 31 different slots, which included 9 for Nintendo's own products, ranging from a short trailer for Luigi's Mansion 2 HD and a plug for the latest Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack upgrade, through to full announcements for a new Metroid, Zelda, and Mario & Luigi games. The September 2023 General Direct had 32 slots, but one was a sizzle reel, so really 31, and out of these 12 were Nintendo slots. February 2023 had 36 slots, and 12 dedicated to Nintendo. On the other hand, the August Partner Showcase had 29 slots for third-party games, although these did include 10-second wrap-up trailers. The February Partner Showcase had 27 slots, which included 1 for Nintendo Switch Online third-party game updates, and Endless Ocean Luminous, which, while developed by Eureka, was published by Nintendo. This again included a very few short glimpses at games, sometimes only 8 seconds as part of a wrap-up. Now, there's no way that these slots aren't allocated with a great deal of care and attention, and moreover, with involved negotiations with third parties. The timings aren't overly strict, but it seems to me that spaces are allocated in a few key increments. There are the very short wrap-up slots of 8 or so seconds, and often these include second glances at titles which have featured in previous Directs, suggesting that they may well be part of the same contractual arrangement. Then most Directs feature segments of about 30 seconds, with a few longer ones of 2 minutes or even 3 minutes. Clearly there's some wiggle room, and my hunch is that Nintendo are a lot stricter with themselves than other companies in terms of allocating time. Looking back at the last full Direct in June, it's notable that some announcements have very strict time allocations indeed. The Switch Sports update was 1 minute exactly, Super Mario Party Jamboree was exactly 2 minutes, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD was exactly 30 seconds, and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond was a second or two short of the full 2 minutes. Not all Nintendo trailers are quite as disciplined. Brothership had just over 2 minutes, but this was a little different in that Shinya Takahashi did an extended outro commenting on it and highlighting some of the specific elements of the game. Meanwhile, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD had about 1 minute 35 seconds, but again, Takahashi-san had commentary to add. The third-party games are generally far less consistent in timings, but I expect the requirements are still quite tightly specified. Beyond this, most games fall into the category of roughly 30-second slots, chiefly for smaller announcements with a couple of features that are a minute or just slightly over, and the occasional much longer feature. Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake had over 3 minutes, for example. In general, it seems to follow that their biggest partners are granted the best real estate, with Square Enix, Capcom and Ubisoft often having longer slots. So, having started with a plan for minimum friction and maximum freedom, suddenly Nintendo has all these deals all over the place, probably about 24 for a single direct. The timings will need to be agreed in at least some level of detail, as if a Nintendo Direct feature is the cornerstone of these third-party companies' marketing campaigns, they're going to need to get organised around it, and they can't just sit on their hands while Nintendo decide whether or not they feel like dropping something. But opening the circle to more third parties inevitably invites in leaks, but moreover constrains Nintendo's actions. This explains the innovation of partner showcases, which came about, of course, during the pandemic. Now, the carefully scheduled marketing plans that Nintendo have cultivated with multiple different partners could be maintained without impacting too much on Nintendo's core content. I don't necessarily think the spate of Twitter announcements for games that year was a particular attempt to experiment outside Directs, therefore, but more a reflection of the fact that in uncertain times, they didn't want to tie their already uncertain release schedule to Nintendo Directs, which by their nature are inflexible. Now clearly there is another reason for preferring partner Directs over full-fat generals, and it's the ability to withhold for longer their current release schedule, especially if it's rather thin. All things considered, Nintendo hit the big time with the June 2024 Direct, which took some very low expectations and raised them against some major new games, including the wonderful Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom and the first actual glimpse of Metroid Prime 4 in 7 years. There's an art to revealing enough to keep people engaged, but not so much that it ties their hands. I'm always reminded of the stock price dip after the June 2018 Nintendo Direct, which went a little too narrowly on Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and was soon followed by Directs in September 2018 and February 2019, which showed off a lot more about Nintendo's future plans, including teasing big titles like Luigi's Mansion 3, Animal Crossing New Horizon, Mario Maker 2, and Zelda Link's Awakening. At this point though, the stakes are much lower for Nintendo. Then Nintendo had come off an era where game droughts were a real problem, and in 2018 they were just barely papering over the cracks in their schedules with liberal use of ports of games that in many cases were only a few years old themselves. Now people know that a Switch successor is around the corner, and Shuntaro Furukawa has effectively set expectations with his May announcement that they would provide more information on the console before the end of the financial year. Disaggregating the partner content from the first-party announcement schedules frees them up to be as flexible as they like. If they want to do an ad drop like in 2016 for the Switch and then follow up with a big direct, they can. If they want to just go in for a direct, they can do that too. If they want to get third parties involved, they can do that as well, but probably going through different and, dare I say, even more secure channels than regular directs, and they're probably going to focus only on their major collaborators if they do something like this. This of course resembles 2020, where as well as Twitter drops, there were actually quite focused first-party presentations for Super Mario Bros. 35 and even a video with Eiji Aonuma talking about the forthcoming Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. But for all this, separating third-party from first-party content is likely to have mixed response for Nintendo's partners who rely on the eyeball-grabbing capacities of the Nintendo first-party lineup to keep people's attention. So it's something they need to be very careful with, and it's only something they should attempt when they have particularly critical announcements to roll out. And now we cycle back to where we began. Now we need to consider where the current format is limiting to Nintendo. For one, it's not new or surprising in any way anymore. In a world where even Sonic will put out what is essentially a direct, rammed with information, newer fans probably won't even remember that Nintendo blazed this particular trail. Secondly, they're tied to a very limited expression of the games, short trailers. Thirdly, the directs have become notoriously leaky of late, with people frequently being able to provide information for key events, sometimes several days beforehand, spoiling Nintendo's carefully planned surprises for many. What would be ideal also is if we could resuscitate from E3 the idea of people being able to actually interact with and play the games ahead of time. The problem with games is that ultimately you experience them through playing them, and so it's quite difficult to capture the magic in videos alone. I've often looked at titles, even and perhaps especially ones I've been really excited for, and had moments of doubt. Will this actually be as fun to play as it looks? You never really know, even if you're talking about franchises that have been good in the past. Will this be the one that disappoints? Will that new mechanic turn out to be just a bit weird, really? Nintendo does try to push out demos where necessary, and it has been quite creative with these in recent times, such as having the early chapters of Famicom Detective Club, Emmy the Smiley Man, available to build up to the game's release. But these are isolated examples of games. What if they tried to build an audience communication experience, a new form of Nintendo Direct through their online service? You still need a format to disseminate advertisements, those 30-second to 2-minute trailers which are going to go around the web and be used on background to YouTube commentary videos for years after. But what if instead of debuting on a third-party social media platform where Nintendo inevitably has to cede control of their message, they debuted right on the Switch or its console successor? I mean, it's always been possible to watch trailers on the Switch itself, but I rarely ever have, because it doesn't really benefit me to do so. But what if they had their own virtual E3 show floor where you could drop in and play limited glimpses of their new games? I don't mean going onto the eShop and downloading an individual demo, but having a central area, a hub, where you go that will be their showroom and where game trailers would emerge. Okay, so that would be fun, and I could certainly see this being a successor to something like the Nintendo Treehouse, but it doesn't sound like a successor yet to a Nintendo Direct, does it? The crazy energy of a Direct works because it's a presentation with certain rhythms, and that doesn't work if you take a half hour to play a game. But remember that Nintendo has long experience with micro-play experiences. Heck, WarioWare is almost entirely made up of them. What if they turned the Directs themselves into a form of gaming? Not every game clearly could have a playable demo, but what if 3 or 4 times during a Direct a notification came on screen to get your controllers ready, and that meant you could actually play the games you were being shown? Each time the screen clears, you literally wouldn't know what you'll be playing next. You only know that you have between 30 seconds and 3 minutes to get your bearings and see what you're going to find out. The narrator could continue to talk as you play, highlighting key points to make sure you're roughly on track. And of course, everybody would have their own play experience, so if people started sharing this online, they would have not just one point of engagement with a single Nintendo Direct video, but many, many hundreds, possibly thousands of different versions of people's individual play experiences from the same launch trailer. In a game like Echoes of Wisdom, this would be enough to learn an echo and use it to escape. It could be one Mario Kart track, one Splatoon battle, one Sky Island in Tears of the Kingdom, one town from Paper Mario, and half a dozen WarioWare minigames. But imagine how much more immersive an experience, how much more representative of the games they're modelling this could be if Nintendo didn't just show you trailers, but you got involved from the off. Reveal to playing in an instant. Could anything be more exciting, more hype-inducing, more likely to surprise and delight than that? I might also say it's excellent test data for the developers to see if people completely freak out and miss the point of the game. If 50% of the player base end up dead in a hole for 3 minutes, then you know your game probably still needs work. But that's where you don't have everybody do it, but perhaps keep it relatively exclusive. That's where you utilise Nintendo Switch Online, and perhaps even utilise the expansion pack to make sure that those people who are playing are most likely to be able to adapt fast to a regular cadence of gameplay demos. But you may well say, isn't this just pie-in-the-sky speculation? Well, I mean, yeah, but I think there's reason to think that Iwata-san, a visionary in so many ways, would have been looking towards something like this in the same way that having the GameCube bear a handle prefigured a long-term goal to make console gaming portable that only finally found expression after his passing with the release of Nintendo Switch. He once said, after all, it is becoming increasingly difficult for the consumers to be impressed by improvements in graphics alone, so we would like to seek different ways to make an impression on consumers. Furthermore, responding to a 2011 investor question on how the hype for the 3DS had faded due to the long lag between announcement and release, he was thoughtful. I'll quote him in full, but consider how the situation has changed even in the 13 years since he made these comments. The situation, even if a person thought it was amazing at the time of announcement, the excitement fades 6 or 9 months later, may also be felt for the Wii U. If Nintendo could maintain the platform without anyone else's help, or use past assets without any change, for example, enhanced graphics along with 3D view where Nintendo DS software is played on the Nintendo 3DS, then we could keep silent in the preparation of the platform and then announce, we will launch it tomorrow, please buy one. However, unfortunately, we need to have software newly developed for software that uses 3D, beautiful graphics, or new communication functionality on the Nintendo 3DS. This applies not just internally within Nintendo, but outside the company also. In the past, when Nintendo did not receive as much attention as we do now, we did not have to worry about the spread of our confidential information since it did not have any value in society. But since the Nintendo DS and the Wii created a social phenomenon, Nintendo's next move commands great attention and extreme news value. Therefore, although we go to great lengths to ensure that this will not happen, there are cases where, even if a person receives information under a non-disclosure agreement, the information is leaked because there is great temptation. Even for the Wii U, some people may be aware, if they had been checking the internet, that information with true and false rumours mixed together was spreading on the internet before the announcement. Therefore, as for new hardware, even if we wanted to, it is extremely challenging to realise a situation where a product is announced and then launched the next day. On the other hand, as for software, it is often the case where the time between its announcement and launch is very short, but we sometimes receive complaints from our consumers such as, I don't have enough time to consider whether I should buy one. I would like to ask for your understanding that there is a great difference in the time span from announcement to launch between things that we need so many people to be involved in, such as hardware, and things that Nintendo can do on its own, such as software made internally. Okay, so that was then. But now, Nintendo can offer both a social phenomenon, a gameplay experience for multiple people, or a community event like a Nintendo Direct, but also give people time to consider whether or not they want to buy. They can reveal to people all at once and surprise them without the need for a non-disclosure agreement. And while uploading to servers leads to leaks, as we see, even the likes of Echoes of Wisdom leaked early onto the internet and led to spoilers, if they master their streaming provision, then they could theoretically avoid those early reveals and preserve their precious surprises. And this brings us back to this Nintendo Switch Online playtest program, because if I were Nintendo, and if I wanted to launch a new system, and I wanted to launch new games with it, and I wanted people to be hyped beyond hype at these games, and I didn't want it to leak, then I think that the kind of mixed format interactive Nintendo Direct I've just described would be absolutely perfect for them. I'm not necessarily saying that this specific playtest is how they'd announce something. It's a test for a reason, and you usually don't make your first test your biggest event ever. But if the Nintendo Direct format were available through the Switch in a mildly playable form, then Nintendo Switch Online or the expansion pack would be an ideal location. Now, having a playable Direct doesn't prevent them from repackaging that content into a regular Direct for social media. They've already repackaged their Directs into short advertisements, as we've seen. I imagine the content will be designed in a sufficiently modular way to be repackaged as necessary. But the key thing is to give their most dedicated fans, the people who are most likely to advocate for their products, a truly personal and joyous experience. And of course, for them to be able to share this personal and joyous experience on social media, creating a flurry of individual game adverts. Perhaps the specific format I'm describing won't come to pass, but I do feel that Nintendo will want to give the Directs a kick up the backside, or, as Satoru Iwata said all those years ago, continue to innovate successfully. and I could see some kind of major evolution of the format in the next 2 or 3 years. Having a 50-year-old man talking at them was popular then and would still be popular now, but their mission was always to deliver their products directly to the players, and this is the most direct form you could possibly get. I can't really come up with a set of terms to forecast what this major innovation in the Nintendo Direct format could be, because I can't really define exactly what it would look like beyond something different than what we have now, and because it's Nintendo, it probably won't be quite what anyone could perceive ahead of time, but I, for one, will be very interested to see what follows with this format. Is this a specific forecast for the playtest? Well, no, just because the possibilities for that specific project are so diverse that almost anything has low odds, but I do think the current form of Nintendo Directs are far closer to the end than the beginning, and I, for one, am incredibly excited to see what Nintendo do next. Thank you for watching, and check out these lovely videos on screen for more Nintendo forecast action. Thank you to my patrons, and I will see you again soon for another Nintendo forecast.